In Chapter 1 of George Orwell's 1984, the protagonist, Winston Smith, returns to his squalid apartment in Airstrip 1, a province of the totalitarian superstate Oceania. The novel is set in the dystopian year of 1984, where society is under constant surveillance and ruled by the party, led by the enigmatic figure known as Big Brother. As Winston enters his apartment, he is greeted by a telescreen, a two-way communication and surveillance device that monitors citizens' every move. There is no privacy, as the telescreens are ubiquitous and inescapable. The oppressive atmosphere is further emphasized by the posters of Big Brother and the three slogans of the party: war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Winston is a low-ranking member of the party, working at the Ministry of Truth. His job is to rewrite historical records to align with the party's propaganda and maintain its control over the population. Despite outwardly conforming to the party's rules, Winston harbors rebellious thoughts and secretly despises the regime. In this chapter, Winston starts writing in a diary, an act of rebellion against the party, as it is forbidden to keep personal records. He is aware of the risk he is taking, as being caught would likely lead to severe punishment or death. As he writes, he recalls a recent 2 minutes hate session, a daily ritual where party members watch propaganda films and express their hatred for the state's enemies, particularly the traitor Emmanuel Goldstein. Winston also remembers a moment during the session when he caught the eye of a dark-haired woman, a coworker he suspects of being a member of the Thought Police. This brief encounter fills him with dread, as he fears she might discover his rebellious thoughts. Overall, Chapter 1 of 1984 introduces the reader to the novel's bleak, dystopian setting and the constant surveillance and control the party exerts over its citizens. Winston's dissatisfaction with the regime and his choice to begin writing in a diary set the stage for the story's central themes of rebellion, truth, and the power of the human spirit. Chapter 2 of 1984 continues to introduce us to Winston's life under the totalitarian regime. In this chapter, we meet the Parsons family, Winston's neighbors. Mr. Parsons, a fat, obnoxious, and enthusiastic party member, is completely loyal to the party. His wife is equally devoted and their children are zealous members of the Junior Spies, an organization that encourages children to report any disloyal activity to the party, even if it involves their own parents. Winston is disturbed by the Parsons children. They accuse him of thought crime and threaten him with a slingshot, epitomizing the party's manipulation and control over its youngest members. The children's behavior underscores the party's ruthless indoctrination tactics and the chilling reality of a society where even family ties are severed in favor of loyalty to the party. In this chapter, Winston also begins to write his forbidden diary entries. He struggles to recall his childhood and the vague, fragmented memories of a time before the party's rule. He remembers a day from his childhood during the chaotic period of the revolution. His mother and little sister disappeared, and he feels guilty, suspecting they were somehow sacrificed so he could survive. Winston writes, "If there is hope, it lies in the proles," referring to the proletarian class that makes up the majority of Oceania's population. He believes that if a revolution against the party ever happens, it will have to come from the proles because they are the only group that could possibly outnumber the party. Despite his hope, Winston acknowledges that the proles are largely ignorant of their potential power, kept in check by a culture of trivial entertainment and misinformation. The party disregards the proles, seeing them as beneath concern, and does not subject them to the same level of surveillance or control as party members. By the end of the chapter, Winston is terrified. He knows the Thought Police will catch him sooner or later. His diary, his memories, and his negative thoughts about the party are all punishable offenses. But he continues writing, driven by a desperate need for self-expression and truth. Chapter 3 of 1984 delves further into Winston's memories and the nature of the party's control over the past. In this chapter, Winston wakes from a dream about his mother and sister. His family disappeared during the party's ascent to power, and he feels a sense of guilt and loss. He has a vague understanding that the life before the party was different, less cold and harsh, but the details are hazy and out of reach. Winston's inability to remember the past highlights the party's manipulation of history and the resulting alienation it causes. His dream shifts to a scene with a girl with dark hair, the same woman he saw at the 2 Minutes Hate, who, in the dream, takes off her clothes in a gesture of freedom and rebellion. This dream seems to symbolize Winston's desire for rebellion against the party's oppressive control over all aspects of life, including sexuality. After waking, Winston goes to the window where he watches the proles in the courtyard below. He envies their ability to love, live, and express their feelings freely, which party members cannot do. He remembers the phrase, "If there is hope, it lies in the proles." However, he knows that the proles will only rise against the party if they become conscious of their strength, which seems impossible under the party's pervasive control. Suddenly, a violent knocking at the door startles Winston. He fears that the thought police have come to arrest him for his rebellious thoughts and actions. But it turns out to be Mrs. Parsons, his neighbor, who needs help with her blocked sink. Winston is relieved but disturbed by her children's behavior. They accuse him of thought crime and being a traitor, revealing the extent of the party's indoctrination. This chapter underscores the pervasive fear and suspicion fostered by the party, the manipulation of history and reality, and the potential yet unrealized power of the proletariat. Chapter 4 of 1984 provides a detailed look into Winston's job at the Ministry of Truth, or Mini-True in Newspeak, where he rewrites historical records to align with the party's current propaganda. In this chapter, Winston is given a variety of tasks. He alters a news article to cover up a prediction made by the party that did not come to pass. He also receives a note about an individual named Withers who has been declared an unperson by the party. Winston must remove any trace of Withers from the records, replacing him with a fictitious person named Comrade Ogilvy. Ogilvy is given a heroic backstory, an example of the party creating a past that suits its narrative. Winston is very skilled at his job, even though he is aware of the disturbing implications of his work. He realizes that by changing the past, the party controls the present and future. As there are no existing records contradicting the party's claims, people accept them as truth. This manipulation of reality is a key aspect of the party's rule, captured in the slogan, "Who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past." This chapter further delves into the party's control over truth and reality. By rewriting history, the party can justify its actions and policies, maintain its infallibility, and ensure that its power remains unchallenged. It also highlights the dystopian reality where objective truth no longer exists, replaced by the subjective truth of the party. Winston's role in this manipulation adds another layer to his character, as he is both a tool and a victim of the party's manipulation. In Chapter 5 of 1984, we are introduced to Syme, a co-worker of Winston's at the Ministry of Truth who is an expert on Newspeak, the official language of Oceania developed by the party. Syme is working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. During their lunch in the canteen, Syme explains to Winston the purpose of Newspeak, to narrow the range of thought by reducing the number of words in the English language. The aim is to eliminate the possibility of rebellious thoughts because there would be no words to express them. Syme passionately supports this idea, believing that once Newspeak is fully adopted, heretical thoughts would be impossible. This conversation reveals the party's tactic of controlling thought by controlling language. Despite Syme's intelligence and his loyalty to the party, Winston privately predicts that Syme will be vaporized, meaning he will be killed and erased from all historical records. Syme's understanding of the party's manipulation makes him a potential threat. Winston realizes that survival in the party depends not just on obedience, but also on a certain kind of stupidity, a willing blindness to the party's contradictions. Meanwhile, Winston notices the dark-haired girl he had previously seen at the 2 Minutes Hate. He is troubled by her apparent devotion to the party, as he still suspects her to be a member of the thought police. This chapter further highlights the party's manipulation of language as a means of controlling its citizens. It also emphasizes the paranoia and constant fear of citizens, who are aware that they could be reported, arrested, and erased from history at any moment. Chapter 6 of 1984 delves into the party's control over sexuality and interpersonal relationships, using Winston's memories and reflections. In this chapter, Winston recalls his former wife, Catherine. Their marriage was cold, joyless, and devoid of affection, serving only one purpose: to procreate in service of the party. They failed to conceive a child and eventually separated. Catherine, like many other women in the party, viewed sex as a duty to the party to produce offspring, a little boy or girl who would grow up to be a loyal party member. This reflects the party's control over personal relationships and sexuality, stripping them of emotion and reducing them to mechanical acts of duty. Winston reflects on the party's stance on sex. The party seeks to abolish the sex instinct and channel the sexual frustration of its members into fervor for the party and hatred for its enemies. The Junior Anti-Sex League, which the dark-haired girl from the fiction department is a part of, promotes celibacy except for procreation. In his diary, Winston writes about a visit to a prostitute, an encounter that took place many years ago. He remembers the woman's lack of beauty and the absence of pleasure or intimacy in the act. He reflects on how the party's manipulation has made sex a joyless, loveless act. The chapter provides further insight into the party's control over individual autonomy and personal relationships. By regulating and repressing sexual desire, the party aims to eliminate potential loyalties and emotional connections that could distract from total devotion to the party. It also explores Winston's longing for genuine human connection and intimacy, which are impossible under the party's regime. Chapter 7 of 1984 finds Winston reflecting on his childhood and the changes that have taken place since the party came to power. Winston thinks back to a time during his childhood, during the chaotic days of the revolution. He remembers his family's poverty and hunger, and how he selfishly stole chocolate from his younger, weaker sister. This memory fills him with guilt and sorrow, particularly because his mother and sister disappeared not long after that incident. He has a deep sense of loss, not only for his family but also for the sense of decency and humanity that seemed to exist in the old days before the party took over. He also ponders the party's manipulation of history. By controlling information and rewriting the past, the party has managed to convince its citizens that they are better off than they were before its rule, even though Winston suspects this is not true. He is frustrated by his inability to remember clearly, which makes it impossible to challenge the party's version of events. Winston writes in his diary, "I understand how, I do not understand why." He comprehends how the party manipulates its people, through surveillance, propaganda, manipulation of language and history, but he cannot understand why the party does it. Why does the party seek power for power's sake? What is the ultimate goal of this total control? This chapter further explores the themes of memory, truth, and the manipulation of the past. Winston's personal memories contradict the party's version of history, highlighting the destructive power of the party's manipulation on personal identity and understanding of reality. Chapter 8 of 1984 begins with Winston venturing into the Prole district, an area where the proletariat, the lowest class of society, live. The proles are not subjected to the same level of control and surveillance as party members, as the party deems them insignificant. As Winston walks through the district, he enters a pub and tries to engage an old man in conversation, hoping to learn about life before the party took control. However, the old man's rambling anecdotes about his past are frustratingly vague and uninformative. Winston realizes that the party's manipulation of the past has been so thorough that even those who lived through the era before the party cannot provide a coherent picture of it. Frustrated, Winston leaves the pub and walks into an antique shop owned by a man named Mr. Charrington. Inside, he is fascinated by the relics of a bygone era. He buys a beautiful glass paperweight with a piece of coral inside, drawn to its useless beauty. The paperweight, an artifact from a time before the party's rule, symbolizes Winston's desire to reconnect with the past. Upstairs, Winston sees a room that appears to be free of telescreens. He is struck by the room's quaint charm, the old-fashioned bed, and the picture of St. Clement's Church on the wall. This visit sparks a sense of nostalgia in Winston, deepening his longing for a different, freer world. On his way home, he sees the dark-haired girl he suspects of being a thought police spy. He fantasizes about violently raping and murdering her, seeing her as a symbol of the party's repression. This chapter further explores the themes of memory and the past, the party's manipulation of history, and Winston's growing desire for rebellion and connection to a time before the party's dominance. It also introduces new symbols, like the glass paperweight, that will play significant roles in the narrative.